No, it's fine. That's fine.
So you can crank that one up until it starts. But that is the loud one.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine back here. Thank you.
I also have my pink comfy sweater that I bought all of y'all also.
Cindy, how may I help you? Cindy, it's Maria Rodiguero. I'm trying to join this Zoom thing and it tells me to use something else and I don't know how to get on. Is there someone that can help me? Hold on just a second, okay? Thank you.
I can hear her, but I don't see her. She's on there. Okay. Her issue is her,
Maria.
yeah, I can hear you talking to her. Her issue is that she's got her video cut off. Maria, can you hear me? If so, your video is cut off. Let me see if I can cut it back on.
Maria? Yeah. Renee says she can hear you. Your video is cut off. You need to cut your video on. I know, I don't know how to do that.
Okay, tell her to go to the tray. Tell her to go to the tray at the bottom, and it's the second icon from the left. It says stop video or start video. She has to have a webcam on her computer. Okay, is she on hold?
Yes. I don't know how I live on the. That's so bizarre. Hey, Maria, can you hear me? I don't know how to help you with that. Okay. Okay. Maria really care. She won't stop talking.
I don't know, that was weird that the phone call came through. I guess because she was on the phone. I don't know, that's weird. Nobody knows how to use this thing anyway. Sorry, folks. Got just about 5 or 6 more minutes, folks, and then we'll get started. And if you have any questions or anything about last week's purchase and sale agreement, if you want to unmute yourself and ask questions, I'd be happy to answer anything that I can. No. Here, bring it to me. Okay. I'm gonna give it about another minute and then we'll get going. So just for everyone that's joined us recently, can everyone see the screen and hear my voice? You can unmute yourself with the microphone on the Zoom tray, either at the bottom or the top of your page. You'll see a microphone and you'll see a video camera. If you want to stop the video, you touch that and a line will go through it. If you want to start it, touch it again, and you should be able to see. But it is only going to be able to be done from your Zoom tray. So if somebody could just unmute themselves and say, you know, I can hear you, or raise your hand, or put it in the chat box, that'd be great. If everybody would go into the chat box and just type their name in, that would be great as well. We kind of have a roster of everyone that attended. So I'd appreciate that if you could. And last week, we talked about the purchase and sale agreement. I had quite a few conversations with folks afterwards with just really good feedback and really good dialogue. It was a great session. It was long, a lot longer than I expected, but we got a lot out of it. Now, we're not entirely done with the purchase and sale agreement. To recap what we've talked about so far is we've talked about the buyer's agency agreement. We've talked about the listing agreement, exclusive right to sell listing agreement, and the purchase and sale. So going forward, the documents and exhibits and addendum that goes with the typical purchase and sale agreement, we're going to kind of all combine it and, you know, review ways on how to use this and the understanding of these agreements to the best advantage of our customers and clients when we're putting an offer in. It's one of the most important things we'll ever do as agents and realtors are write these offers. So your feedback is greatly appreciated and welcomed, positive or negative. And, you know, I want to kind of, as we move through this series, be able by the end of it to sit down and go, these are all the options you have for presenting an offer and hopefully getting accepted, that it's stable, financially stable, and will close, and that all parties are happy with it. So that's kind of our end goal here. Couple of announcements to make right off the bat. Our offices will be closed this Friday and Monday in observation of Easter, just so everyone will know, and we'll send an email out. And if we can talk John into it, then we may close a little early on Thursday, but that's debatable. But having said that, the following Tuesday, which would have been our next meeting, is going to be pushed to the following week. So next Tuesday, we will not have a Zoom call, but because I really won't have time to work on it on Monday, which is when I usually do this. So we're going to go to the 18th for our next call. And of course, everybody will get that information. The other thing that I did on the link that I sent you to log in, at the very bottom, and then another one I sent at the very top, is the YouTube link to access the last 3 sessions that we've had. They're unedited. I couldn't figure out how to do it, but I was finally able to get it into a playlist format. So as soon as, what that is, well, that's weird. As soon as we're done with this one, I'll be able to go ahead and upload it and it'll be available much faster than the other two. But, it's background kind of a thing. It's, so listening to it, if you just want to put it on in the background on your computer or whatever, it's just great content to listen to. And if you have questions on it, write them down, send me an email, call me, text me, and we can chat about it. So I want to go ahead and get started. And again, if you are a participant, if you'll go into the chat and just put your name in, I would greatly appreciate that. Say hello to everyone. Okay, so last week we talked about the purchase and sale agreement. Presenting an offer is not necessarily always just like real clean and simple. Sometimes your buyer has issues that you have to work through, and one of those big ones could be sale or lease of buyer's property, which is a contingency that you can add to your offer that means essentially that we're interested in this property, we're serious, I do have another house to sell or lease, but I want you to consider my offer. It can go in as a backup offer. It can go in on its own merit as a contingency. So and this is a short session today, so we're going to buzz through these two documents and see how it applies to the purchase and sale and what scenarios are the best case to use it. So right off the bat, buyer agrees to use buyer's good faith effort to sell or lease property in accordance with the terms of the agreement prior to the end of the contingency period, as that term is defined below. Basic stuff. Currently listed with. If, their house is listed with another brokerage, if they're coming from out of town or whatever, you need to fill this in properly so the seller has that info. If you're currently under contract and it's your client, put that info in. Under contract to have a bit of a heavier weight on an offer than just listed. And any other contingency, such as maybe a 1031 exchange going through or something that is going to, you're going to want to protect your buyer in case, whatever the contingency is doesn't follow through. Okay. Buyer closing on the sale of the other property. So super simple. It's contingent upon the closing of the other property. And an interesting paragraph on this choice of A or B, because it's contingent upon the occurrence of the following, is unless the property is under binding purchase and sale agreement, in other words, just listed, at the time of the offer, buyer shall keep the other property listed for sale with a real estate broker at a list price of not more than blank. I don't know why they asked for the list price, but that's where you would put the list price of the property that is making this agreement contingent. Interesting line. Until it is either sold and closed or the contingency period expires, which you're writing the contingency, nothing herein shall give the buyer an ability to terminate this agreement if the property sells for an amount greater than the list price. I found that sentence a bit unusual. I'd like your feedback on it. But if we put over here like 345 and, we get an offer and it closes at 380, I don't see how that would affect it. I think the key word here is closing. So I'm not real sure about that sentence and why it's there. I'm sure there's a reason. If anybody would like to share that, I'd love to hear it. Anybody? Okay, so we seem to be of the same mind. It doesn't really make sense whether it would sell for more or not. Okay, same thing, buyer entering into a lease of the property. It's asking for the terms of a lease agreement, 6 months or more, and a monthly rental rate of whatever until the lease or contingency period expires. So again, the seller and the seller's agent is going to want that information on the property. A couple of things to look out for. In the event that the contingency period ends without either contingency selected above, if you didn't select A or B, being fulfilled, then the agreement shall terminate at that time. Prior to the seller giving buyer notice that seller's exercising the kick-out clause, which we'll talk about in a moment, as that term is explained below, the contingency or contingencies referenced above may be waived by buyer upon notice to the seller. So at any time during the contingency period, if your buyer says, you know what, I'm going to get a bridge loan, it doesn't matter, we have to have this house, I'm going to remove the contingency, they have the right to do so. Okay. The other aspect of it is in the aspect of the kick-out clause, if they get a better offer than your buyer, the seller has a right to exercise the kick-out clause, which means essentially you would either need to eliminate the contingency on behalf of your buyer, maybe put up additional earnest money, or both. Further, in any event the existing pending contract is terminated, and this is important, for any reason whatsoever during the contingency, buyer shall immediately provide notice of same to seller. Buyer shall have the right but not the obligation to terminate the agreement at the time of this notice, in which case buyer shall have the right to a refund of the earnest money. Again, you're working within the binds of a contingency on a sale or lease of property. Now, I have never heard, well, let me rephrase. I have heard of any type of contingency being extended, probably more so on the sale or lease of a property, because closings can get pushed and it can be a domino effect, but it is possible. So bear in mind, if you ever have to, then this is a contingency that you can extend. Further, it goes on to say if buyer does not terminate the agreement at the time of notice, the seller shall have the right, but not the obligation to request that the buyer deliver an amendment signed by buyer to remove all contingencies and due diligence period from the agreement. If seller does not exercise the right within 3 days from buyer notice that the existing pending contract has terminated, so if their house sale falls out because their buyer didn't close and they didn't give notice to the seller, the seller has a right to request the amendment removal and a due diligence period. Again, then seller's right to request the amendment on the basis shall be waived. Okay. In the event buyer does not deliver the amendment within 3 days of seller's request, then seller shall have the right, but not the obligation to terminate the agreement, in which case buyer shall have the right to a refund of the earnest money. So even with a kick-out clause, if a better offer comes along and you've got a contingency like this, the seller has the right to negotiate with you and either increase your offer price or to get out of the contract altogether, either one. Okay. Moving on to the kick-out clause explained, and I'm going to paraphrase this real fast. A kick-out clause allows the seller to continue to market the property, which is always a big advantage for a seller, which is why these sale or lease contingencies are popular, but with restrictions as listed below. And you have two options. You have option one, this agreement is subject to a kick-out clause, or this option two, the agreement is not subject to a kick-out clause. So again, if you present this contingency and you don't necessarily want them to be able to market the property going forward and risk your seller's offer falling out of favor, then you would want to select option two. It is not subject to a kick-out clause. Okay. So in other words, they can't really come back and increase anything. They can only wait, like earnest money or whatever. But what they can do is they can wait for the expiration of the contingency, if that should happen. Any questions on that? It's a very, very short little form. It carries a heavy weight, and you will find yourself more often than not with a set of buyers that have found a home that they have to have, but still have a property to sell.
Renee, if you're representing a seller and this comes to you from the buyer's agent, you would always want to have the kick-out clause, wouldn't you?
You would, because you would want that option. It's a contingency is a contingency. So you would still want that option for your seller, and that's when the negotiation comes in. And this can be a tool for both the buyer and the seller to negotiate with. So let's say you select the kick-out clause, okay? It goes further on here to say, in the event the seller receives a bona fide offer to purchase after receipt of notice withholder, additional earnest money of blank, will have typically it's 72 hours after receipt of notice to deposit with the holder additional earnest money of blank and deliver to seller an amendment to the agreement signed by buyer in which buyer agrees to remove the amendment, contingency, and or due diligence period provisions in the agreement to the extent checked below. So I think that was Joyce that asked that question. So on the seller side, you definitely want to have it. If a buyer wants to stay in it, then they're going to agree to possibly put down more earnest money. It's a negotiation. It's not required, but it can be done. And further, you can go on to negotiate Part B, the contingencies of due diligence. If you really want to pass or solidify the offer with the buyer, then you're going to want to remove other contingencies. Obviously, sale or lease is removed. Due diligence period, tread lightly. Right to request repairs. I don't know if I would agree to remove that on a buy side. Finance contingency, appraisal contingency. It depends on who you're representing in the transaction that these are the most advantageous for. So huge negotiation right here. Maybe a time to increase the sales price if you do have a really good offer, but it's maybe not as stable as this one, even with a house to sell. There's a lot of factors involved there that you need to consider and use it wisely. The one thing that I will tell you that I do not recommend is don't check all of these boxes on B. Don't waive these and remove these from the agreement. Okay, by simply checking A. And then 2, subject is not subject to a kick-out clause. Again, it goes back to the negotiation part on both the buyer and the seller on how they want to handle it. But remember, the buyer does not have the great leverage by presenting a contingency like this. So the negotiation can get fierce. Further, you can add special stipulations, special stipulations that would override any of the printed information up here. So on your special steps might want to be something to consider that you can add that would protect your buyer and or on a counter with your seller. Any more questions on that one? If you do, just unmute yourself.
I have a quick question, Renee. This is Yvette Williams.
Okay.
Can you go to the top of this form? What is the name of the form again?
This is sale or lease a buyer's property contingency. Excuse me. This is an exhibit that would be presented with your offer if the buyer had a house to sell or lease in order to.
Yes. So my question
conclude.
is, do you have to use it? Because I've had cases where I purchased a home and I didn't want to have the purchase of my next home contingent upon the sale of my new home because I didn't need the financing or, for the other home. So in Georgia, do you have to use this form or can your buyer waive it and not have the purchase contingent upon the sale of their current home?
Absolutely, you can. it's an exhibit to the agreement. It's not required. Some people are not in the position where they have, the funds to buy a new home and carry the costs on the other one. So this is one of the tools you would use if that's the scenario with your buyer. But no, you don't have to use it at all. That's why it's an exhibit to the
Well, what
agreement.
if your buyer needs the funds, but they don't want it contingent? How
Then
would you handle that?
Well, you could possibly put it into the special steps on the original purchase and sale agreement. I wouldn't recommend that because the language on this is much better.
Mhm.
In a situation like that, I don't see why they wouldn't use it.
Well, like for example, when we were in a really hot market, we didn't want to use it because we knew that they wouldn't accept our offer. So,
And
in
that's-
those positions, buyers don't want to use it because a contingent offer is not as strong as an offer that doesn't have contingencies. So
Right.
we didn't want to use it because we're like, they may not accept our offer. And like I said, we were in the situation where we didn't need our financing from our current home per se. But what if some, and I always thought about, I said, what if a buyer doesn't want to use it just because they want a stronger offer, but they do have a contingent sale technically, like if they don't get the money from their home, they can't move.
Well, that would be an unstable financial transaction, and not disclosing that to the seller would not necessarily be ethical, in my opinion. Because what if your offer does get accepted and it comes to the 11th hour? Oh, our house didn't sell, we can't close. They're going to lose their earnest money.
Yeah.
And depending on how much that is, it could be a great amount to anyone. So, the purpose of writing a stable offer, and I understand that when you guys are out there and it's hot and heavy and you want your offer accepted and stuff like that, then maybe, you're going to try to become very creative with the way that the offers are presented. But when it comes down to it, if you don't feel that it's a stable offer financially and the earnest money's at risk or anything else could be at risk, then you probably want to just be the advisor to your buyers and say, look, it may be tough, but this is going to protect you. And I think that if you do that, rather than, trying to manipulate the transaction to an extent, that they would probably respect you for looking out for their best interests. Again,
Well, see, this is
I
when
think everybody should bring honesty to every transaction.
No, well, I'm asking because I was a buyer. This is where I was licensed in Georgia. And because I
Right.
had sold and purchased so many properties, I knew what I knew, and I'm just reflecting on that.
Right.
And I asked the agent that was working with me, I said, listen, I don't want to have this contingent because we don't want this to have to do with anything else. So I was just actually wondering, now that I'm licensed, should he have actually done that? Because we actually end up needing the funds from the previous sale, but we had it not connected to the purchase at all. So when the reason was, we had some financing hiccups, they were like, well, you didn't even say you had a house that was, needed to be sold. So I'm just thinking, now that I'm a realtor, how would I approach that if someone tells me leave it off when they have a house to sell? Because we knew we were risking our EMD, but we wanted the house.
Right. I understand. Again, I think that it takes a moment to explain what the ramifications would be of buyer default, in a situation like that. If it got down to it and they couldn't close and they didn't disclose it, you're not going to get any extensions. You're not going to get anything because, now they've discovered that there was a contingency out there that wasn't necessarily disclosed. In my opinion, all parties to the agreement should have all of the information available. They really, really should. These are contract forms in Georgia. They're binding. They do have penalties. And if you explain that to your buyers and they still want to move forward with it against your best judgment, then maybe you want to put a special step in there or something as opposed to the form itself. I don't recommend that, but it is something that you can do. I recommend, strongly pre-qualifying these people. And as I said, I mean, this was your property, and that's the decision that you made. But maybe you need to put yourself in the shoes of the buyer that you're representing and protecting. Because the first time something goes wrong, then the buyer's going to blame you. And I
Renee?
think that happens more often than not.
Renee, we used to see a lot where, I haven't seen it that much anymore, but in the comments of a listing, it would say that the buyer must be pre-approved by a certain lender.
Yes, I've seen those. Yes.
This might be a case where you'd want to put that into the negotiations here, that they get another opinion of another lender if the lender has said you don't have to sell your current house in order to buy the next one.
That's a great idea, Joyce. Absolutely. And it certainly doesn't hurt a buyer at all, or their credit if they get pre-approved with a couple of lenders. It would affect writing the offer. They need to settle on someone by them, but getting additional opinions, I think, is a great idea. Thank you, Joyce, for that feedback. And thank you, Yvette, for that feedback, because you're coming at it from a buyer's point of view, which I think is important that we all need to understand sometimes, is to look at it of the point of view of our customer and our client and proceed. I don't think if these forms were not important, they wouldn't have been created to begin with. But again, each transaction is unique in that regard. So just understand the power of the document and use it as a tool for your business. Okay, let's, any more questions on sell or lease? I want to hop over to the backup agreement contingency. Okay, let me switch pages here. And let's back over here. Okay. Yay, I did it. Yay. Okay. Can everybody see the backup agreement contingency exhibit?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. All right. This is a real short one. A couple of things to understand is that when you're in a multiple offer situation and you're putting in a backup agreement, it's not necessarily the listing agent's responsibility, nor do they have to disclose what the other offers are. The only thing that they do have to disclose is what number you are in line. Because a few things that people don't understand is like, well, we'll put in a backup agreement on this and we'll keep looking. And that's great and fine and wonderful. But if you're the only person in line for that backup agreement, and it's been, a few days, and, the primary agreement starts getting shaky, but you're not really doing your follow-up with the listing agent, and all of a sudden it falls apart. But now you're in negotiation over here with a new property that your buyer has found. What do you folks think would happen in a scenario like that? Could you be under contract on two properties at once? Any comment?
Well, I think that's possible if the dates don't coincide perfectly.
Right. It's very possible that you can end up like that because we get busy, we have multiple clients, and maybe we put this backup agreement in 2 weeks ago. And, at that time, it didn't look like we're going to get it. Maybe we were second or third in line and we just moved forward. The one thing that I want you guys to realize, if you're in a backup agreement situation and the moment that your buyers have bird dog on another house or putting an offer in, you need to immediately speak with them and say, we need to cancel the backup agreement on
Yeah.
123 Main Street. Because if you forget about it and you end up in that situation whereby the seller has automatically moved you to first place, it can be a problem, okay? One of the things that's highlighted in here that says buyer has no right to purchase the property unless the primary agreement and other higher priority backup agreements, if any, which are more specifically identified on addendum backup contingency F605, and I'll show you that in a minute, probably never seen it, attached here to and incorporated herein are terminated and seller gives notice to buyer of the same. So you can't forget about these types of agreement because they will come back to haunt you. I had a situation recently where that happened, and that's why I wanted to talk about this. Very good agent, very competent agent, just simply forgot that there was a backup agreement out there, went under contract on another one. The seller got really irate, and they ended up, because they just simply forgot about it, lost all their rights that this agreement gives you, and ended up having to pay that seller their earnest money that was a part of the backup agreement. And it was the first situation I've ever seen like that. And I think it's important that we understand that it's a possibility that it could happen. Not to get ahead of myself, this addendum to backup contingency exhibit F605 is simply, and I'll show it in a minute, is a list of contracts that are in front of you. And what the document has on it, well, I'll show you. Hold on. Can you guys see that one?
Addendum back, yeah.
Addendum to backup agreement. All this agreement consists of is just whomever is in front of you and what order you are in. That's all that the listing agent has to provide to you. Okay. So if you're down here and you never think you're going to get up here, never be 100% sure that that won't happen. So, okay, let me go back to our other documents. The backup. Okay. Moving forward, in the event the primary agreement and all other backup agreements and higher positions are terminated, seller shall deliver notice of the same to buyer. This agreement shall become primary and no longer subject to this contingency exhibit. And buyer and seller shall close on this agreement in accordance with the terms and conditions provided. However, that A, notwithstanding anything to the contrary contained herein, all parties agree that time limits, except delivery, deposit of earnest money, shall commence on the date that the notice of termination of the primary agreement and all backup agreements in higher positions are provided, and that B, the closing date shall be the date listed in the agreement, unless because of the change in the binding agreement date, any time periods for buyer to conduct due diligence or fulfill other contingencies, excuse me, the agreement extends beyond the closing date, in which event the new closing date shall be 7 days from the last date. The buyer has to fulfill buyer's contingency or the end of any due diligence period, whichever is later. How confusing is that? So basically what it means is that your binding date becomes the date that the seller gives notice to you that you are now the primary. Okay. So if you need to negotiate a different binding agreement date or renegotiate your due diligence or your inspections or whatever in your original offer, has to be done prior to acceptance of seller's notice. So in other words, you know, you get the email from the listing agent, oh, hey, you're number one, we're going to take your offer. At that moment, you need to make sure that everything in the offer you presented, which could have been a week ago, it could have been 3 days ago, is everything that you want your buyer to have on their offer simply because you aren't going to have any other time to negotiate that other than right now when they notify you that you are primary. And forward, your exit on here, which this other agent should have done, but left blank, and which is how they lost their earnest money. If this agreement has not become primary by blank, April 23rd, March 4th, December 31st, this agreement shall automatically terminate. Okay. Moreover, buyer can terminate the agreement at any time prior to receiving notice from the seller that this agreement has become primary by giving notice of the same and paying seller a termination fee of $10. I've never seen that happen, but it's in there and it's possible. Who knows? They would have to enforce it. So just kind of always never forget about these backup offers, because you can cost, if you had 3,000 or 10,000 down and something went south, then you could be forced to pay that. And always remember, put an out date in, because you can always go back and amend that and change it depending on where you are in the pecking order. Super short document that carries a big, big impact. And I just simply want everybody to understand how, this can impact anything else that you're out there looking at. Because like Yvette said, in a hot market, when, all of these properties are going left and right and you want to get the best offer in and you want to do this, that, and the other, you've got to keep it online and keep it coherent for your buyers to understand. And, don't think for a minute that your buyers are not out there every moment of the day running around looking at property with or without you. They are. They do it anyway. Sometimes they tell you about it. Sometimes they don't. But they need to understand the default and or ramifications if they are in a backup situation or sell or lease a buyer's property situation. So short and sweet, told you it was going to be today. Any questions on either one of these documents? Anything? Does anybody have anything they'd like to ask questions about, or, from any of the other forms that we've talked about, or any forms that you're working on now?
Well, I have a question that you might have covered in the first one, which I had to miss.
Okay.
And that was about putting the amount of commission into the listing agreement, into the buyer brokerage agreement. Do you leave that blank? What I've normally done is to say that my commission would be as offered by the listing agent, because, I have some control over that, really, as far as, anyway, I just, as to whether or not I'm willing to take a lower commission or whatever.
Right.
But suppose you then get into a situation where they're only giving 1% or 1.5% or something.
Right.
Does that agreement change anything, or?
Well, it's your buyer's agency agreement, and, it's typically completed, before you start the search process. So you really don't know what your folks are going to land on, or, what the commission share is from the seller. But not to go down a rabbit hole from your question, I do want to bring to everyone's attention that there is a lawsuit going on right now with the Department of Justice and NAR, National Association of Realtors, over sellers paying commissions to buyer's agents. I won't get into much detail, but the DOJ won the right for their plaintiffs to turn it into a class action lawsuit. which if it goes through, will set a precedence that will eventually, in my opinion, my humble opinion, end up being that the seller will pay their agent and the buyer will pay their agent. Now, that may be far down the road. It may not be. The fact that the forms are already changing and we have the option to ask for additional commission from our buyers if we don't receive it from a seller. And also to note that the co-oping commissions have dropped considerably. I think everybody has noticed that as well. If this DOG thing goes through and they set a precedence that would allow, and this is the scary part, this is what keeps me up at night, that would allow a seller to go back and sue a brokerage for any buyer's commission that they paid through a certain time frame, which is what this suit is about. And the defendants in the suit right now are Anywhere, which is Coldwell Banker Rheology, it's Keller Williams, it's HomeSmart, and it's Remax. Those are the 4 largest brokerages in the United States that have been named in this lawsuit. The original lawsuit was filed in Missouri and in Illinois. There were 2 separate ones. The Department of Justice has stepped in to combine both of those into a class action suit, which could open up any seller out there in any state to jump in on this bandwagon per se. And I'm sure it will get worked out. I'm sure brokerages, even the big ones, even the small ones, may end up on the hook for returning commissions to sellers, which we don't want to do. Obviously, money's gone, depending on the time period that we received it. And it's not something that we want to see. So having said that, to be innovative and to get ahead of the curve, I think it's important that we learn how to present our value proposition and realize that, hey, I know I'm worth at least 2 points. And if a seller is only paying 1 point and I'm going to ask you to pay 1 point, then I will get my 2 points because that's my value proposition, or 3 points or 4 points or 10 points. It can be whatever you want it to be. It's always negotiable. Commissions are not set per se. So we need to learn how to utilize those forms. Now, one of the things, Joyce, that we did talk about, and maybe this was last week, was that using closing costs, okay, as coverage for that. So, say closing, and again, it depends on if the lender will allow it. Say closing costs are $4,500 and the 1% is $2,000. So you're looking at $6,500 in closing costs from the seller. If the buyer's lender will allow it, then there's the 1.5 that the buyer would have to pay you a commission on, or 1 point, or whatever it is. So you got to get creative with that. But my point being is don't leave it blank. And because your services end up being totally free. Mm-hmm. And you can't refuse to show a house based on how much the co-op amount is. That's unethical. It's unprofessional. It's unethical. It's about finding a client a home. It's not about how much you make. It is, but it isn't. It's a razor thin wire that you want to be very careful with. But still, you have the option right now where, you can put 0 in there, you can put a 0.5 point in there. It's the conversation that you need to have with your buyers. I don't know if I'd bring up the DOJ thing. It's kind of an industry thing that's going on now that hasn't really been settled, and there has been no precedent set on that yet. But everything will come to a resolution, good or bad. So we just need to be prepared for that. Did I tange off on you, Joyce? I apologize.
No, that's very helpful to know the background on that.
Did
And
you guys know about the DOJ?
I did not know.
All you have to do, go to Inman News, go to Rise Media, any industry magazine, even Google it, and just say DOJ NAR class action suit, and it will come up, and it's pages and pages and pages. You can actually go in on the DOJ site and see the charges themselves. So you're literally reading it verbatim from what's going on. And
Well,
again, just news to know.
I had thought all along that the fact that when you negotiate with your seller, what the commission's going to be, the total commission, and then the brokerage pays the other agent,
Correct.
I thought that sort of covered that as far as who's paying who.
And it does. And you're absolutely right. And that was one of NAR's argument. It creates a larger buyer pool for sellers to sell their properties because it offers cooperation. And that's the way it's been for a long time.
Mhm.
I don't really understand why a seller, well, I can understand why a seller wouldn't want to pay it, but I can't understand that if they're going to, put a house out there to sell, that they can't expect it to be for free, basically. Because if you want to do that, put it on Zillow, put a for sale sign in the yard, for sale by owner sign in the yard or something.
Exactly.
But yeah, if you want representation, it's going to start costing buyers a point or two on the sale.
Well, I have always thought that one of the biggest problems between us and sellers has been the commission anyway.
Yeah.
You know, they're always,
I'm
it's
sorry.
always their first place to go when something doesn't work out,
Yes,
to
it
their
is.
numbers. And,
Yes, it is.
or comments about it, you just have that all the time. And people just don't understand it, but, we all have to.
We're working for a living.
Yeah, we do. That's right. We're not doing this for free.
We're not doing this for free. It's not a hobby. But I agree with it. But, the one thing, and again, the one thing about this industry that is guaranteed is it is going to change. I mean, it's going to change constantly. I mean, remember when we got fax machines?
Remember when we got buyer brokerage agreement?
Exactly. And Beretta came along and you would have to
Yeah.
walk up and introduce yourself and say, hi, I represent the buyers. The Smith is in this transaction. And you literally had to shake the other listing agent's hand. That's how I was trained. That was Beretta.
That was a long time ago.
But it is changing and, maybe changing for the good. I don't know, everything's becoming so innovative and, high tech and everything like that. Now we have AI that can go in and can write our listing descriptions for us. Have you ever put the details in for one of your listings in an AI program like ChatGPT or Copy AI? It will spit back the most gorgeous description for a listing you have ever seen. And it's fun. And a lot of those apps, those AI apps are free. And what you would do is you would just put in, 4-bedroom, 3.5 bath, private yard, swimming pool, sunroom, whatever the major features are of the house. And it just comes back and they're so well written and so elegant. I was like, wow, this is a big change. This is good. This is good. I tried to write a description for my house and just blanked on it. I was 4-bedroom, 3-bath. What can I say next? So, yeah. But also for flyers, they work well with flyers too. If you're going to do a flyer for your listing or something, you can create beautiful flyers with AI. You just have to plug in.
And what is the actual app?
The one that I like, which is free, is called Copy.ai. So it's www.copy, COPY, .A as in apple, I as in intelligence.
Okay.
So it's Copy AI. And they will also give you options to do like different, styles. Like they have a professional style and they have a casual and they have an elegant and they have a technical, type verbiage that it comes back at you. It's really interesting. I think it's a great tool for realtors and agents to use. And I think that's going to be one of the big things coming in. And especially with emails for like follow-up if you're prospecting or you're working on your CRM. And sometimes, like I said, you just get that blank in your head, but you want to give a high touch to all of the people in your database, which you should do regularly. Everybody knows that. These Copy AI emails that you can create are perfect for that. So yeah, I encourage everybody to kind of go in and check it out. What I would like to do at some point is find somebody that's really, really good at it and have them sit in on one of our sessions and, kind of explain to us how that works. I'm going to do that. And there was another person that I wanted to bring in as well, and it escapes me. But it would have been, I can't remember. I'll figure it out. Any more questions on any of the offers or anything else you guys would like to chat about? Well, I'm enjoying these sessions. And like I said, I'm going to go ahead and post this to our YouTube, or it's my YouTube account, on the playlist. And we'll send you guys the link once again. The link will never change for this meeting, and it will never change for access to the videos, good or bad. So I'll just keep sending them to you. But if you have any emails that you've received in the last few days, all of those links are still good. So
Okay.
I appreciate everybody coming. If you didn't already do so, please dive into chat and type in your name so I know that you were there and I can give you a shout out. Greatly appreciated. And I won't see you next week, but I will see you on the 18th. Take care, everybody. Have a wonderful holiday.
You do
Bye-bye.
the same. You do the same, Renee. It was a great class. Thank you.
You're more than welcome. Have a great day, everyone.
Okay.
Happy Easter.
Happy Easter.
You too.